Welcome to the Sell More, Lose Less podcast. We bring these podcasts to touch on and then discuss briefly with academics and guests key topics within retail loss and security. And today we're going to be talking with Professor Emmeline Taylor, and with the discussions about the use of the more proactive use of CCTV or IP video in retail. As retailers network up all the cameras, they can start to see what's going on in their stores in real time. And as we'll talk about, they can even talk to the stores and the stores can talk back to them. But this all started with a great report from Adrian Beck about, I would say, nearly 10 years ago, where he went to retailers and asked a simple question: why have you got video? Why have you got CCTV? And he got a lot of silence on those questions. People didn't have an immediate answer to that. And often it was because CCTV had been seen in retail as sort of like, well, it's a comfort blanket. We need it there because that's what the store specifications have said. And we use it sometimes when we've had an incident in the store to retrieve the information. So it was quite a revelation to sort of, and perhaps not, that it was, so almost a reactive use. It was a sort of, as I say, a comfort blanket. But for the last 8 years or so, we've been bringing together retailers who are looking to take a more proactive use of video, technology that's evolving rapidly, plus networking with IP, which again is something that's scaled over time and become more affordable. And we bring them together, once a year in a meeting, but we have regular updates on the use of it. It includes sort of body-worn cameras. It also includes facial recognition, video analytics, perimeter alarms. But I think for the purposes today, we're going to perhaps do a bit more on the use of remote monitoring centres. And we've just come back fresh from a 2-day meeting where we've had about 50, 60 retailers join us to go through an agenda around that, and Emmeline was there to facilitate as well. So, Emmeline, as you start to get into this world of sort of remote monitoring centres, security operations centres, what are you sort of picking up in terms of what some of the key themes are, the problems, the good things, the bad things, the ugly things, the things coming over the horizon that is keeping you, interested in this whole space?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating area, and I think that's because it's developing at such a fast pace. And so we heard examples of SOC security operating centres that are hugely varied, but the one thing that they have in common is one word: it's integration. It's about how they integrate all of the different video streams, alarms, alerts, panic buttons, etc., into one centralized hub that enables those retailers that might have stores, across large geographically dispersed areas, to be able to have oversight of what's happening in each of them and have that 24-hour live surveillance plugging into the CCTV, the body-worn cameras, etc. So for me, it's how do they then begin to bring together all of these different streams and strands of data to be able to respond quickly, effectively and appropriately back into those stores, and either de-escalate situations, highlight if somebody's coming into the store that perhaps shouldn't be, and really support the staff on the ground in those bricks and mortar stores. So there was so many interesting conversations about not only what's happening at the moment in terms of SOCs, but what is possible. And we had a USA presenter come along with probably one of the most sophisticated operating centres in the world, talk about that, just what is possible. It was fascinating, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And as you say, they are very common, these remote monitoring centres. They still don't have a common name. Sometimes they're called crime centres. What else? What other names did you hear?
Intelligence hubs.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, all sorts. Yeah, they've got lots of different names. Internationally, they're called different things, aren't they?
And some are huge. I mean, there's one retailer in a group, I think they have 120, 130 people. Some are a bit smaller. And they have a range of, broadly, they have a sort of like two modes of operation. Either it's sort of reactive, stuff like digital evidence management gathering, or proactive, monitoring a live incident and So what are you picking up in terms of those different use cases? We'll maybe start with the proactive ones, then we'll go to the reactive ones.
Yeah, so the proactive is really it's just providing that extra support to in-store staff who might not have the capacity, the training, the experience to deal with some quite high-level incidents. So let's say an armed robbery, for example. And so it also takes out the emotion or the fear, in the moment, should one of these incidents be occurring. So the operating centre will be alerted. That might be through a panic button. It might be, various alarms or a call. It could be multiple different ways. And we'll come to communication in a moment, because I think that's really key about how they work. And then it just enables those staff to alert law enforcement, to talk to the people in the store, perhaps, and to walk them through it. So this proactive involvement of the SOC, I think store staff are really seen it as this really supportive resource and really welcome that engagement. Now, in terms of reactive, this is where we heard, it's much easier to put data points on the reactive responses, because you can measure the number of police call outs, the number of arrests, the number of prosecutions, the amount of evidence that you've managed to compile. And that's much more easier to communicate than events that never occurred because you intervened at that moment. So I think weighing up that proactive and reactive, there's different use cases, of course, but I think the operations centres that are most effective are doing both of those tasks.
Yeah, and we heard that from the USA retailer that they're overlapping the people doing those different tasks. So when you got 3 o'clock in the morning, there might not be much to do on a proactive basis. All the criminals and the stores are asleep, but you can still do some of the reactive stuff, as you say, digital evidence management, or maybe building internal cases or building up external cases against organised retail crime. So yeah, it was really fascinating, all that. Now, you talked about communication. You got me thinking, what did you mean by communication?
So, I mean, these security operations centres, I would say, when done properly, are an exemplar of sophisticated technology that is available to the retail industry. So, next generation body-worn cameras, headsets, we've got live facial recognition. There's all these multiple streams of data that are landing in these remote centres, ready for processing, ready to be analysed and acted upon. Now, in terms of communication, where I'm seeing a slight sort of friction in their operation is how they're then communicating back into store. So we know some of them, they're literally having to go back and pick up a phone. Well, what if nobody answers? Or they're paging a member of staff. And this is where I'm just finding it quite interesting that it almost feels slightly jarring in some ways. So I think that's perhaps where we need to see a bit more activity. How do we have this two-way communication that is seamless, that runs smoothly, and that is in real time? Because that's the whole point of these operation centres. So for me, that communication is really key and perhaps hasn't quite been worked out in some examples.
Yes, I think one of the things that I see happening is there's often a sort of typically the security operations centers are owned by the security team, with the help of IT. But there's a business part that's also really keen, especially the business part, about reducing shrink and operational expenses and improving compliance. So I see a sort of tension between these two, and I think there's some, and I probably would be in the camp, that these need to become business tools, and it needs to become a resource for the whole business, not just only to manage the crowds that might be spilling into the stores for a riot or a big march or something, but also some of the operational stuff like looking over checkouts, with self-checkouts, and spotting what might be going wrong in terms of people mis-scanning, or it could be doing audits rather than sending in a sort of a physical person to do an audit of how tidy the back room is, or what the car park looks like, and whether people are following processes. You just have a virtual audit. And I can see many more use cases emerging from that, and also the whole cases around slips and falls and pieces around compliance. So I see over time, I think security going to take the lead, But I'm hoping that these become broader operational centres over time, and we are seeing some retailers adopting that, but starting, with the security, often starting on a proactive mainly. Sometimes it gets to reactive, but pretty impressive.
Absolutely. And there's some great examples. I visited one in Europe that was just incredible for the breadth of activity that took place within those four walls. And we talked earlier about how you might have stores really geographically disparate locations, and those stores they then may present with slightly different issues. And you're absolutely right. You can go into this with the security lens, but you can also broaden it out, because what might be an issue to one store in one location might never pose as a problem in another. So you might have some, as you said, managing civil unrest that suddenly flared up. You might have another location with a heat wave. We know that we're going to have increased antisocial behaviour, etc. But also some of these more sophisticated ones are also overseeing where they might have deliveries, and there might be a particular vulnerability around the back of store. So they'll oversee that delivery to make sure that everything's been done correctly and there's no vulnerability from criminal networks perhaps trying to infiltrate perhaps. Or it might be monitoring an alarm that's going off, so that store manager doesn't get dragged out of bed at 4 a.m. only to find that a fox has managed to get on the premises. So there's so many different ways I think that these can be utilised. And in the UK, we seem to be overwhelmingly looking at it from a crime and security perspective, but other countries are using this in a much more holistic way.
Yes, no, I remember that, visiting that with you, and that was that amazing executive travel, so keeping an eye on all their executives as they flew around the country and the trucks and logistics, plus also having live feeds on all the social media to understand whether there was something locally going on. I remember at the start of this journey for me, one of the security directors, American guy, senior vice president of security, whatever, he got called into his CEO's office, and the CEO sort of showed him a screen. This is about 20 years ago. Showed him a screen and said, "Look, I can see this panda here, in a Chinese zoo, brushing its hair. How can I not see my stores?" and from that, there's sort of like they've built out, an amazing sort of remote monitoring center. But it's that sort of, I wonder whether we'll be looking back in sort of like, 5 years' time and say, "What do you mean you haven't got one of these remote monitoring centers? You can't see your stores? What? Is that
It's
right?"
a brilliant point, isn't it?
Yeah. So and for me, just if I was the CEO of one of these companies and there's something going wrong in the stores, there's an incident, there's floods, or there's whatever, to be able to see the store before the local news reporter gets in there and tells you what they think's going on is invaluable. And in terms of brand reputation, probably can save your stock price plunging by 20 or 30% because you're not seen to be in control of your store. So I think these have got broad business application. There's, as you pointed out, the communications, we're still in the growing stages, I think, of this. But certainly the cohorts of retailers we've got around the table, global players, I think 100 odd retailers in this group certainly seem to enjoy it, and they certainly seem to enjoy your retail risk model, which is something that's coming up next. But
coming soon, that'll be hot off the press before we know it.
But again, it's something else that can be plugged in and thought about in terms of your security operations center. But thank you so much, Emmeline. Really appreciate your insights and your thoughts, and we'll no doubt return and speak to you soon about retail risk models, I'm guessing.
Thanks, Colin. Great to see you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR retail loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.